Hello there, my name is Mooseman. Today I will be informing you of whether you should play, wait, or avoid the roguelike game Sproggiwood. As always, we will be looking at gameplay, visuals, value, and future potential before making a final verdict on the beta version of the game, Sproggiwood. Sproggiwood is a roguelike game set in the land of Sprog, where you are a cloghead who is working to build a civilization under the guidance of Sproggy, a mysterious and somewhat dim-witted spirit. The first thing I should mention is that if you're not already familiar with the term roguelike, it simply means that the game has elements similar to the 1980 game Rogue, including procedurally generated dungeons, permanent death, and turn-based combat. Sproggiwood follows the roguelike style of gameplay pretty closely with a bit of a twist on how death works, but before we talk about death, let's talk about life in Sproggiwood. Your mission is to traverse through the randomly generated dungeons and defeat the boss at the end, which in turn will open up new types of dungeons and new classes for you to use. However, this is not easily done, as the game can be extremely brutal if you do not plan your moves carefully. Each action costs you one turn. You can attack, cast a spell, move, or simply stand still. Once your turn is over, all the enemies will have a turn to do the same thing. After killing a certain amount of enemies, you will level up, giving you additional health and allowing you to unlock a new spell or upgrade a spell that you have previously unlocked. These spells are essential for your victory in Sproggiwood, as meleeing your opponents often leaves you open for immediate attack. Each class has a vastly different kit of spells, and while at first you will only have access to the farmer class, you will eventually go on to unlock the warrior, the archer, the thief, the wizard, and the vampire classes, all who play extremely differently and require different strategy and weapons. There's a reason that the roguelike style of gameplay is still being used today. The gameplay style is incredibly fun and challenging, and in Sproggiwood that is no exception. Each type of dungeon has a different set of enemies with their own special abilities that require you to approach each dungeon with a different set of gear and strategy. While in some dungeons you may need to focus on healing yourself from long-range attacks, in other dungeons you will want to focus on killing as quickly as possible to prevent enemies from calling in additional reinforcements or performing multi-turn abilities. Regardless of what type of dungeon is present, each dungeon has its own unique set of challenges based on what kind of creatures are in the dungeons and how the dungeon layouts differ, which keeps the dungeons interesting even though the actual gameplay stays the same. Another variation on how your character behaves is in the armor you could find. Although most roguelikes have some type of armor system, Sproggiwood does armor and weapons especially well because every type of armor and weapon available in the game had some strategic use depending on what I found in my past failed attempts. No armor or weapon ever seemed to be overwhelmingly stronger than anything else, and while I did have my favorites, I was constantly having to change my armor to better accommodate the challenge at hand. Although I won't go into every class, let's take a look at the farmer class to get a clearer view of how leveling up and using skills properly in Sproggiwood can mean certain success or failure. Each class has 4 unique skills. The farmer has a long-range projectile pitchfork that costs 1 stamina, a scarecrow that fears enemies and costs 2 stamina, a pumpkin bomb that also costs 2 stamina, and a heal ability that fully heals your character for 3 stamina. Stamina can be gained through potions or through killing enemies. Each enemy killed gives you 1 stamina. This is where most of the strategy comes into play with Sproggiwood, deciding which ability to unlock or upgrade, and whether or not to use stamina to kill an enemy or enemies. Deciding how much you want to level up your character before proceeding through a dungeon is another option you will have to consider in terms of strategy. All you need to do to progress to the next level of the dungeon is to find the staircase that leads to the next level, which you can sometimes spawn immediately next to. If you run immediately to the stairs, you may get through the level faster and safer, but you will be unprepared to face the boss at the end. However, if you try to kill some of the enemies for experience, you may end up hurting yourself or being completely dead long before you reach the boss. Risk and reward is present in every move you make, since you cannot predict the layout of the dungeon. One mistake and your perfect run could end in ruin. The stamina system and level up system both work great in Sproggiwood. Rarely did I ever feel like you lost without it being your fault. There are some frustratingly hard levels, but I never felt like I actually lost unfairly, just that I had made too many mistakes in how much health I had burned leveling up, or that I had leveled up the wrong abilities. Earlier I mentioned that death works somewhat differently in Sproggiwood as opposed to more traditional roguelike games. In Sproggiwood, instead of the game being completely reset upon failure, only the dungeon you were trying to complete resets, meaning a whole new layout for the next time you go through. The weapons you found in the previous run are removed from your inventory, but you can use the gold currency that buy those weapons permanently for future uses from the in-game shop. This is where Death in Sproggiwood differs from other roguelikes. There is still a bit of progression you can make even in failure. Gold currency used to buy items from the shop is obtained by killing enemies, opening chests, breaking pottery, and completing each dungeon with different classes. The shop outside of the dungeons includes all the weapons and armor you have ever found, and it also includes consumables and cross-class perks including bonus experience and more health. This makes it possible to start a dungeon with a certain weapon and armor kit, giving you the advantage if you know what is coming up and plan for it. The use of the perk system also makes additional playthroughs on other classes faster if you know how to take advantage of those perks correctly. The perk system, weapon system, and armor system work extremely well in Sproggiwood, even though it breaks away from the traditional roguelikes. It also allows you to strategically plan for the dungeon, which is absolutely necessary because Sproggiwood is very unforgiving. There are several dungeons where if you do not strategically plan your armor and weapons, you will have little chance of surviving. The perk system does make dungeons easier, but cannot be used as a crutch against playing badly. What the perk system excels at is enhancing the player's ability to finish dungeons faster. When you are running through the dungeons with other classes, the perk system gives you the ability to complete these dungeons faster than the first playthrough once you understand the mechanics of the game and class. One final minor aspect in the gameplay department is the ability to edit your town. The entire premise of Sproggiwood is building a civilization, so adding a town edit feature makes complete sense. You unlock new buildings through completing more dungeons, which you can then place as you please. The amount of villagers in your town will also grow naturally when you beat more dungeons, but to bring bosses into your civilization as villagers, you will have to defeat each of the bosses on each of the classes. The town has no effect on the actual game, but it's a nice little feature that helps tie the story into the gameplay a bit more. Sproggiwood has a beautiful looking universe and sprite system that is enhanced by both the gameplay and the story. Although nothing stood out visually, everything in Sproggiwood was pleasant to look at. The sprites were well animated and had that happy look that deceives you into thinking Sproggiwood might be a walk in the park. While I won't spoil anything related to the story, I have to mention that the story was surprisingly deep and well written. The humor in the writing hides a surprisingly dark story that makes me hopeful for some DLC or a Sproggiwood 2 to expand upon this story. The game cost $15 to purchase, and to me that feels like actually a very fair price. Although it only took me 5 hours to complete all the dungeons with the farmer class, it felt like an almost entirely new game as soon as I started playing with another class. The strategy changes so much between classes that it is totally worth playing through the game additional times. After just having beat the game, I actually struggled with the first few dungeons because I essentially had to relearn the game from another perspective as the warrior class. As the farmer, I had bombs, a long-range attack, a fear, and a heal, which made me learn to beat dungeons by keeping my distance and kiting enemies around. With the warrior, I had much stronger short-range attacks, but none of the tactics I had used as the farmer worked anymore. The amount of diversity between all of the classes gives Sproggiwood very high replayability, something I actually didn't expect until actually trying the other classes. In addition to the class differences, the roguelike style of randomness also makes each individual trek through a dungeon feel like a different experience, further enhancing the replayability of the game. In terms of future potential, I honestly can't see much growth happening in Sproggiwood solely because Sproggiwood is a pretty complete game already. There may be additional dungeons in the future, but the story is pretty much wrapped up by the end and the game feels polished. The only time I ever encountered a glitch in the entire game was when I had a loading screen get stuck, which for an early access game is extremely impressive. As I said earlier, I would love to see more of the story be expanded upon, but it looks like that will come as either DLC or a sequel. The one thing I would like the developers to add to Sproggiwood that I feel is missing from the game is some screen size options. The game only runs in full screen, which is fine for most people, but the ability to change to at least a windowed mode, if not a borderless window mode, is just something I expect to see as a basic setting that is missing from Sproggiwood. In the end, Sproggiwood is a beautiful, fun, challenging roguelike game that definitely deserves the verdict of play. With the amount of class diversity, the weapon balance, the armor balance, the enemy creativity, the style, the challenge, there's just no reason not to give Sproggiwood a try. The $15 price tag may be a bit high if you only go through the game with one class, but I can almost guarantee by the time you are done with your first playthrough that you will want to definitely come back for more. Thank you for watching my review of Sproggiwood. If you like to buy the game, a link to the Steam store page is down in the description below. And if you would like to experience more of my content, You can like my video and subscribe to my channel. Although it's just getting started, reviews and other gaming commentary will be coming out weekly, like last week's review on Autocraft. Finally, I will be streaming some gameplay of the other classes in Sproggiwood on October 25th, 2014 at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on my Twitch channel, so come on by and see some more Sproggiwood if you have a chance.